Greetings, I'm Richard Rhoda, and it is November 6th, 2018. This interview is part of the Tennessee Board of Regents Oral History Project, and with me now is Randy Boyd. Randy? In the way of a very brief introduction, it was just less than 2 months ago, I guess, when the University of Tennessee Board of Trustees elected Randy as president of the UT system, acting president, and that'll take effect in a very few weeks. In the way of the background that is relevant to this project, Randy is a Knoxville native, a University of Tennessee alumnus, a very successful business executive, and generous philanthropist. He is the founder and chairman of Radio Systems Corporation. He was the architect of the Drive to 55, which is a landmark development in Tennessee higher education. It includes the Tennessee Promise and the Tennessee Reconnect, which other people in this project have addressed as well. And that's all part of the Drive to 55 and to increase the educational attainment of Tennesseans. Randy led Tennessee Achieves as chairman and acted as Governor Haslam's special advisor for higher education. He served as chair of the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, where we work together, and he was also commissioner of the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. So with that, there's much more, but for our purposes, that's it. So Randy, thank you for being here.
Thank you for doing this project, Rich. I think it's great to be able to document this while we still can remember it all. And
right.
Also, thank you for that kind introduction.
Oh, sure.
And I do appreciate the term architect because it feels like it's the right term to use. Because often there are many architects, and that doesn't mean you necessarily built it. There were a lot of people and a lot of hands involved in this project, but I'm proud to be one of the architects.
Well, the architect, right. So why don't we just begin with a conversation, and let me just, the opening questioning was, I would regard Knox Achieves, Tennessee Achieves as the prototypes for a lot of things that came and that followed. So your involvement in that and what your thoughts were.
Yeah, well, it's a very serendipitous journey, and I think serendipity is a great word for this entire project that we've had, this great journey we've had in the state of Tennessee, because many of the best things that have happened were unexpected, but better than maybe what we had planned. So it actually all started with me wanting to make Knoxville the most pet-friendly city in America. I'm a pet guy. It makes sense that we would want to do something around animal welfare. It turns out that Tennessee and Knoxville are not. In fact, we're one of the worst. And so rather than thinking incrementally, I thought, let's set a big, hairy, audacious goal. We'll make Knoxville the most pet-friendly city in America. To do that, I needed my county mayor's help. His name was Mike Ragsdale, one of the unsung heroes in this whole journey. He came to my house one morning. We made a trade. He would help me make Knoxville the most pet-friendly city if I could help him with his vision. And his vision was to make sure that every young person in Knox County, when they graduated from high school, regardless of income or academic ability or family support, would have the ability to go to a technical college or a community college free of charge. And so we started identifying what we referred to as the underserved, those young people that didn't have the academic or athletic ability to get a scholarship to go to college, those that didn't have the money to go, and maybe most importantly, they didn't have a family member, a friend, a brother or sister that could support them and encourage them. And so we created a program that did three things. One, we would provide a last dollar scholarship so that everybody could afford to go, at least cover their tuition and fees. Second, to a technical or community college. Second, and there's a lot of people that had ideas in this program. I'll take credit for one thing. So I'm a Boy Scout master, or was for 17 years. In Boy Scouts, when you earn a badge, you have to do a community service project. So I said, well, if the community is going to do this for them, they should do something back for the community. So for each semester, they got a free ride. They would have to do a day's worth of community service. And lastly, we matched them each up with a volunteer mentor from our community. And that turned out to be the single most important thing in the program looking back. In 3 years' time, we sent over 1,000 kids from Knox County to college, and with a 50% greater retention rate than the general population. So not only was it effective in raising or getting kids to school, they were effective in making sure they were successful too. Then one of two big things happened actually. One was my board member, Mayor Haslam, got a job as Governor Haslam, says, hey, this is a good idea, roll it out across the state. And then my executive director, who's been the executive director from the beginning, Chrissy Delejandro, decided to write to THAC, where some gentleman named Rich Rhoda was the director, and asked for a grant for like $900,000 to expand the program. The board and I, she asked if she should apply, and the board and I just laughed that that's not going to happen. They're not going to just give you money. But sure enough, she won the grant. The grant was to help us expand the program. So thanks to you, thanks to the governor, we had this inspiration to go ahead and the means to roll it out across the state. Within 3 years, we were in 27 counties, offering scholarships to 24,000 kids, sent 5,000 to school in 2013, matched with one of 2,200 mentors. But we still felt it was a failure because of two things. One, it was only a 3-year program. The way I would raise money, I would ask donors, if you have $100,000 to donate, give me $33,000 a year for 3 years. That way I could pay for 1 year worth of remedial classes or 1 semester and 2 years to get their associate's degree. The limiting factor on that is that I could only go to seniors and offer this to them. I couldn't offer it to them sooner. And too often you go to a senior and make this great offer, and they would say, they wouldn't actually say this, but they would have this look in their eye like, gosh, if I'd only known I was going to college, I might have actually prepared myself. They just hadn't put themselves in a position. So we always wished, wouldn't it be great if we could promise it earlier? And then second, we were only in 27 counties. We have 95 counties. The 68 counties that needed it the most were the poor counties I was unable to raise money in. And so we always wish we could offer it to more kids sooner. The governor asked me to be his special advisor on higher education, and this was another question, so I don't want to go too long on this answer, even though I already have, but I'll just say that through that process, we were able to create something called the Tennessee Promise and create an endowment that now made the Tennessee Chiefs program not only in all 95 counties, but something that we could offer in perpetuity. And why I think that's so significant, not only could we go to kindergartners and their teachers or their parents and offer them this so they could start preparing themselves, but I think it changed the culture of our state. I remember the governor, when we asked later about how we're going to accomplish the Drive to 55, and he asked me, what do you think your biggest barrier is to accomplishing that? And I remember coming up fairly quickly with an answer, and looking back, I still believe it's true. And the answer was, the biggest barrier to accomplishing our goal is our culture. A culture of low expectations. Too often our children don't believe they can succeed, our parents don't believe that it's going to be in their future, but because of the Tennessee Promise, we can now tell every child and every parent to expect more because they can go to college if they choose to.
So then you already started back into this, but so the conversation you had with Governor Haslam about being his special advisor.
Right.
And this is what then led to getting the things rolling with what would become the Drive to 55. But if you would talk a little bit about your initial, what you expected to be when you came to Nashville, and you basically committed a year of your life to working not only with the Higher Education Commission, but the Board of Regents and UT, and trying to, well, I want to just kind of leave it there. Like, did you have a clean slate, or did you have some preconceived notions, or how did that work?
So the way the process worked, originally at the Republican National Convention in Tampa in August of 2012, the governor took me aside and asked me if I would be willing to help him in some way in higher education. He wanted to see if there was a job I was interested in. I said, well, no, I really don't want a job, but I tell you what, I'll volunteer for 3 months, we'll put together a committee and do some research and come up with some ideas. And so Bill Lyons, myself, Emily, whose name I'm spacing, and a couple other folks you may remember.
I do remember there are other folks.
Yeah, there are a few other people on the team. We did some research for about 3 months and came up with a range of ideas. One of the ideas was something like Tennessee Promise. We didn't have a name for it, but that concept, and it was obvious because I'd spent the last, at that point, 6 years working on that, that would be something I might want to recommend. But we had a range of ideas. But the thing that I realized pretty quickly at the end of those 3 months was that it's one thing just to hand off a paper, but if you really believe that these things are important, you should hang around and get them done. So I volunteered to stay another year for the year 2013 as an advisor to him. We made up the title, Special Advisor on Higher Education. I just coined it one morning. He said, "Hey, how does that sound?" He says, "That sounds fine." So that's how I became the special advisor on higher education. I think maybe the first and the last and the only special advisor. Yeah, special advisor on higher education. They hung up the jersey afterwards. But so the first year, the first month or two, was about trying to determine a mission. So one of the things you do when you start a new position is to listen. And I had the great fortune of not having any portfolio that I was responsible for. I could cause chaos and look at new things without having to manage anything. You were kind enough to give me an office in your building, and also give me the assistance of Mike Krause. You said you thought it would be a dynamic young man that could help do some research for me, which turned out to be brilliant. And with that, I went around the state asking questions. The big questions, so how could we improve higher education? And what is your best idea to improve it? And I got literally hundreds of ideas, pages and pages on a spreadsheet of all these ideas around ways in which we can improve higher education in a range of areas. But the problem with them was it was hard to determine the good idea from the great idea. And I found in my business the difference in a good idea and a great idea. The great ideas move you further and faster towards your goal. So but the challenge was we didn't have a mission. At least I didn't think so, because I went around all over the state asking people, so what's our mission? Until finally one fateful morning, I think it had to be in mid-January of 2013, you and I had breakfast at around 10 o'clock. It was late at the Hermitage Hotel, Capitol Grill. I still remember it. And I'm asking you, Dr. Rhoda, we need a mission. We need a mission in the state of Tennessee for higher education. And you looked at me and said, well, Randy, there is a mission. It's in the public agenda. I said, well, that's great news, doctor. What is it? And you said, the mission is by the year 2025 to reach 42% post-secondary attainment. And I asked, well, that's great. How did we pick 42%? Well, we're at 32% today. If we stay on the same trajectory that we're at today, we'll be at 39%. Well, that's great. Well, how do we get with 42%? And you said very reasonably that, 42% will be the national average by the year 2022. At that point, we were like 42nd or 44th. So going from 42nd or 44th to the national average is a pretty lofty goal. Yet for some reason, but for some reason, being the national average just didn't sound like, our big, hairy, audacious goal is to be average in 13 years. So I said, well, if we dreamed of what we needed to be, where would that be? And he said, well, that's obvious. Other foundations, Gates and Lumina have all said that by the year 2025, we need to be at 55%. So based on that conversation, did some other discussion, we came up with a goal of getting to 55%. One Sunday morning in my library, early, I just the name Drive to 55 popped in my head. I emailed the governor, say, what do you think about branding it that way? He said, that sounds fine. And so in about 30 seconds of one early Sunday morning, we came up with the brand. It fits on a bumper sticker. It sticks. Everybody remembers it. And so that's how we came up with the Drive to 55, an overarching mission for our state. And then from there, it was another year working with stakeholders all across the state to build the strategies to get there.
Well, I remember distilling, this is going to be a loaded question, but I remember distilling it down. There were some things that didn't quite make the final cut. Do you remember any of those? It may still be out there in the future, but they didn't make the initial. Yeah, on the Drive to 55, we had 5 different strategies. Get them ready, getting students prepared, getting them in, which was the Tennessee Promise, getting them out, making sure they graduate, finish what you start, making sure that adults were part of the process, and accountability and alignment, making sure that we're measuring success at our higher education institutes and making sure they're aligned with the industry. So those were the 5 key strategies. And each of those had a whole series of different things we wanted to do. As I think back on both the access piece and the reaching out to adults, one of the things that we never really executed on was more online programming. And the idea was to create online university that all the universities in the state shared. And still today, and I can even confess that my current job, I'm finding that not only within the UT system are different universities within the UT system
thinking of creating their own programs on their own platforms, but even colleges within a university are not cooperating with or communicating with other colleges. So, maybe you might need to duplicate a professor in front of 50 students in a classroom 100 times a year in different geographies, but you don't need to create a lecture online 100 different times. And so that was a missed opportunity, being able to leverage the online. I think it's missed, but it's not gone. It's still something that we can do. And another big one, and this came from what was then Jamie Place in the governor's office, on the success piece, was to have a statewide network of advisors, people that would be able to work with students to make sure that they got in and then were successful. And it was unquestionable that advising was important, but the budget, I remember, was roughly around $20 million a year, and that was more than we were able to sell that year.
Yeah, I do recall that. Well, back to the online, so again, it was talked about serendipity. So while you were doing the work and getting all of us in higher education to think on a higher level and greater thoughts, they coincided with the MOOCs, the advent of the MOOCs, and we took a shot at that. And I guess there's some remnants of that about.
Yeah, there's still some remnants, and our idea was using the MOOC platform to create what people now refer to as a flipped classroom, where you would be able to provide a lot of the content, the lectures, the testing, the analytics online, but still have a professor have a personal contact with a student, have tutorials and coaching. And my understanding is there's a few of those classes still going on, but at a recent meeting at the University of Tennessee with the top leadership, nobody knew what I was talking about when I brought up edX and the MOOC program. One person went online and found an article, but that was that. So obviously it didn't take.
Well, maybe the time has yet to come.
Yes.
And you introduced us to the principles, the leadership of the two MOOCs at the time, and that was a success.
Yeah.
Well, good. So the Drive to 55 came together in a legislative package, and basically then you went on for a while. You left us to deal with our own devices. But then pick it up again then, now that, not quite yet when you're back, but were you involved or engaged in, to what extent were you engaged with the idea of the Focus Act?
Okay, so back to just to get clarification around that whole process. We came up with the Drive to 55 in January of 2013. The governor announced the concept at the State of the State. We spent that year developing the strategies and the initiatives, and then he announced sales and money for the online programming and Tennessee Promise in January of 2014. And then I left in February of 2014. So with all due respect, I extended my contract by 1 extra month. I promised 12 months and I stayed 13 months, all free of charge. I even bought the coffee cups that the Drive to 55 had. I felt like I had to build the brand, and nobody in government resources don't allow you to buy merchandise for brand building. So, but I went off in 2014 back to my business and came back again in 2015 as Commissioner of Economic and Community Development. During that 2-year period, I was the chairman of the Workforce Subcabinet, which kind of focuses on the 5th strategy of the Drive to 55, which was making sure that everybody was aligned. So on the subcabinet, we had Department of Labor, Department of Education, UT, TBR, Economic Development, and a few other resources all working together to try to make sure that everything from kindergarten through graduation of a post-secondary degree was aligned to the workforce. During that last year, the Focus Act was being developed. I was generally supportive, but Mike Krause, working with the governor, actually led most of that effort.
Right. Well, and actually backing up a step before that, before you became commissioner of ECD, you were a member of THEC.
Oh, a very important part, yeah. So I was I'm sad that you brought that up. So I became a member of the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. I think it was in 2013. And when I left as special advisor in 2014, the governor appointed me as the chairman of Tennessee Higher Education Commission. Now it's a 2-year term, each is 4 years, but my goal was to be more like Putin. He's that guy that, he was supposed to be term limited, but he's still in charge. How does that happen? That was my goal. I wanted to be in charge of THAC forever because I loved working with you. I loved working with the department, creating higher education policy. In December of 2014, the governor asked me to be his Commissioner of Economic and Community Development. I said yes, on condition that I can be chairman of THAC. He said, well, sure, that shouldn't be a problem. I thought, this is perfect because we've been talking about how we need to align the workforce with higher education. Well, I'm in charge of both. So, unless I'm schizophrenic, we are going to be aligned. This is going to be great. But then, unfortunately, late in January, after I've already said yes to the job, it's all in the papers, somebody from the governor's office calls and says, I have bad news. Turns out, constitutionally, you can't be a member of the governor's cabinet and be on a commission. So you're going to have to resign the commission. So my goal was to be the longest tenured chairman of THAC, but the records, I think, will stand. I'm now the shortest tenured chairman of THAC ever. Yeah. But it's a great organization that you helped make.
Well, it was a sad day when they invoked the law. So let me just mention this.
You can edit that.
No, it all stays in. One take, one and done. Well, no, the connection with ECD and education, we pointed this out to many people. When you were commissioner of ECD, your website really was a website for education. It just made that direct link. I assume it still stands today.
I think so. Yeah, something that I was fond of saying during that period was that, and I still try to get it in when I can, is that educational development is workforce development, which is economic development. They're all inextricably linked. You can't do one without the other.
Right. Okay. Well, in the time we have remaining, so let's talk about the Focus Act is now in place. Then the follow-up were the UT Focus Act with a reconfiguration of the board, and now you as the acting president. So what's the vision? How does this all, where are we headed?
Well, just specifically to the Focus Act and to TBR, I think the most important thing that it did was give more focus and attention to both the locally governing institutions. Each of the 6 universities now have their own board that are very animated and passionate about their schools. Now, that's going to have its downsides. The director of THAC is going to now have to manage a bigger set of constituents and stakeholders that are all going to be advocating for their agendas. So that's a challenge. The good news is there's a bunch of passionate people out there advocating for agendas. So it's mixed. But I think on balance that'll be good. Importantly, though, now the Tennessee Board of Regents is solely focused on their community colleges and technical schools, where I wouldn't say they were never an afterthought, but they were part of a much broader organization. Now they can get the total focus of the Board of Regents, which they deserve and need. And so I think that part is good. From a University of Tennessee presidency perspective, one of my primary goals, I've got 6 major objectives, but I'll focus on just one of them, and that is we've got to grow our talent development engine. The University of Tennessee system graduated 11,806 graduates in 2018, all-time record. We graduate more than any other enterprise in the state, but we could do more. Other universities, for example, University of Alabama has zipped past the University of Tennessee Knoxville in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, Tennessee had 22,000 undergraduate students. University of Alabama had 17,000, 19,000. Today, University of Tennessee has 22,800. We've been flat for 10 years. Alabama has 32,000 undergraduates. Total graduates, they now have 39,000. They've grown by like 57%. In total enrollment over the last 10 years, we've declined 6.4%. We've got to put an emphasis back on growing our talent development engine, and we can, by doing that, back to the Drive to 55, we can be a major contributor toward that goal. It takes everybody. It's going to take adults coming back into the system. It's going to take our technical schools and our community colleges and our locally governed institutions. It's going to take all the private schools in Takua, but we also have to make sure that our flagship system is doing its part to contribute, and we're going to be focusing on growing more graduates each year.
Yeah. So I know you talked about the Knoxville enrollment has kind of plateaued, and there for a while that was a strategy. I mean, but you're saying that that's not. There's time to rethink that.
It's definitely time to rethink it. And the University of Tennessee Knoxville last year came up with a plan to start growing by 3% a year or 15% in 5 years. That's good. I'm not sure that it's enough, but at least we're beginning to think more about growth. And I'm not, maybe actually an interview question for you later, but was that a strategy to be flat? One of the things that I found interesting when I asked people the question of the 14 SEC schools based on growth, where would you expect Tennessee to be? Most people say the middle of the pack. And I've talked to leadership across the system. Most think that we're in the middle. Nobody knows that we're last. So I get the impression that it wasn't a really strong strategy to be flat. I think maybe there's an opportunity now to refocus and work on growing the talent pipeline.
Well, when I said it was a strategy, this goes back a number of years, but it was when funding was such, and this is way before the change in the funding formula. But it's like if the dollars weren't going to increase, they were going to keep the dollar keep the number small, so it wouldn't be diffusing.
No, that makes sense, and I have heard that. I guess, as you point out, it was maybe more of a reaction to a budgetary crisis some years ago, not necessarily a strategy. But it turned into an unwinning strategy, unfortunately.
Yeah, it just became the behavior.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, I think our time is about over, and this has been great.
Yeah.
I really can't just best of wishes in the next few years in this next chapter of what you've done for higher education.
I think it's great that you're documenting this chapter in history, but there'll be many more chapters left to go, and I'm looking forward to working with you on many of those chapters.
Well, great. Thanks, Randy.
Thanks, Rich.
Right.